That's it, come right away and get in the shade as best you can. Come all the way in. That's it. That's it, come forward a little bit for me. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And welcome to His Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London, a World Heritage Site. My name's Yeoman Warder Briggs. I'm one of 35 Yeoman Warders that work and live here at the Tower of London. So for the next 2.5 hours, I'm going to be your guide. No, not 2.5 hours. No. For the next 50 odd minutes, I'm going to take you on a journey through time. And as we walk around this amazing complex, I'm going to point out some historical buildings and tell you a little bit more about history, okay?
Yes.
Also, we tell you about murder. People have their heads chopped off, a little bit of blood and a little bit of gore. You up for it?
Yes.
All right, you've all been warned. So the story of the tower, well, that begins way back in the year 1066, when William, the Duke of Normandy, he was better known as William the Conqueror. He defeated the Anglo-Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. William, he went on to be crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day of that year. But he had to continue to fight his newly conquered subjects, as he did not take too kindly to Norman domination. William, he looked for a site that could build a press and overawe the citizens of London. He chose that site just inside the eastern city wall where once a Roman fort had stood. And it was here, in 1078, that he ordered the construction of his first royal palace and fortress to be built in England. We refer to today as the White Tower, and it's situated behind this big massive wall here. There's no point in looking, because it's behind this big massive wall right here. And we'll have a much better view a bit later in the tour. Over the next 200 years, successive monarchs, they continued to add to the defences of the tower. This inner wall here, this has got 13 smaller towers and was completed around 1220. The outer wall, completed in 1280, has got a further 6 towers all to the south to defend against an attack coming up the River Thames. To the north of this wall, there's 2 strong bastions. On that corner, Legs Mount, and the other corner, Brass Mount. Now, they would have had cannons situated inside the mountain on top to defend against an attack coming from that direction. The third line of defence, well, you walked over that when you entered into the tower today. That green grassed area you saw to your left and your right when you crossed the middle drawbridge, that was once a moat or a ditch. Filled with water, goes all the way around the tower. Built during the reign of King Edward I, who brought in an expert from Holland to master water. It was 120 feet wide, and when fully excavated, 15 feet deeper than you could have seen there today. Now, that was designed to use the tidal flow of the River Thames. Twice a day the River Thames would flow into and around the moat to keep it clean. And this system seemed to work really well at first, but all the rubbish and excrement directed in from Shoreditch, Houndsditch and the tower itself soon made that moat the largest cesspit in London. Yeah, and a source of pestilence to anyone that lived nearby. But that's not a problem, not really, because it only stayed like that for 500 years, until in 1843, the Duke of Wellington, he got permission from Queen Victoria to get the moat drained. He then had it filled in with sand and shingle to the height that you see there today. He then put that to good use as an exercise area and a playground for the troops that were based on the tower. As I said earlier, this was the first royal palace and fortress to be built in England, and the White Tower has been used for many things over the years. This was a royal residence right up until 1603. The last reigning monarch to reside here was King James I. Since 1303, the crown jewels and royal regalia, they've been safely stored in the battlements of this mighty fortress. Being a fortress, its main role was an armoury for the storage of warlike stores and provisions. This was the site of the first Royal Observatory for the study of stars and planets, and so that was moved down to Greenwich in the 17th century. All documents and papers of the monarch's court, they were held here at the tower until moved in the middle of the 19th century to form the Public Records Office. This was the Royal Menagerie, the first two in London, home to some weird and wonderful creatures here. We had lions, we had tigers, we had a polar bear, we had a big pack of monkeys. We even had an elephant here at the tower. But we were rubbish at looking after animals. When we got this elephant, for instance, they asked what it was, and we had no idea. They said, what does he do? We've got no clue at all. I said, where'd you get it? They said, it was a royal gift. I went, oh, it's a royal elephant. Now, at that time, in the medieval period, the water was so putrid that royalty would drink beer, wine, and eat cake. So we fed him a royal elephant cake, beer, and wine, and he died. But I'm led to believe he died really quite happy that morning when he finished all his breakfast. Then in 1835, the Duke of Wellington, he got the animal shifted up to Regent's Park, and that's best known today as London Zoo. And last but no means least, this must rank as one of the most famous prison complexes in the world. Now, talking of prisoners, when you came to the tower today, you most likely came from the top of the hill, walked down past the ticket office, made your way through to the River Thames, turned left and then entered into the tower. Well, at the top up there's an area up there known as Trinity Square Gardens. And Trinity Square Gardens, that stands up on Tower Hill. Now, Tower Hill, that was the site of many executions between the 14th and the 18th century. King Edward IV, he had a permanent scaffold erected up there in 1465. Much to the concerns of the citizens of London. Over 75 men of noble birth were to be executed up there on Tower Hill by means of block and axe. The first victim, in 1381, that was a man named Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, he was dragged up there by the peasants of London and he was executed for daring to introduce a poll tax. 7 years later, in 1388, the first legal execution took place up there on Tower Hill. Now, that was also a Simon. That's Simon de Burley. And the last victim in 1747, you've probably guessed already, was another Simon, a Simon Fraser, the Lord love it. So if your name was Simon around these times, people tend to keep that a little bit secret. Well, let's all pause and imagine the scene. What it'd be like up there on Tower Hill on the day of an execution. Literally thousands of people to gather around the raised platform up there to witness the proceedings. After delivering his final speech and saying his prayers, the prisoner then kneel on his neck on the block. Giving a word or a signal, the execution would then bring down his axe, hopefully beheading his victim with one single stroke. The execution would hold up the severed and still bleeding head, turning to the assembled crowd and proclaim, "Behold the head of a traitor. So die all traitors. God save the king," and the crowd would roar.
God save the king.
Wow. Thank you for turning up. The only person. I built that up for everybody then, didn't I? What happened there? Up here, there was a massive cheer from everyone. Well, let's try that one more time. The execution hold up the severed and still bleeding head, turning to the assembled crowd and proclaim, "Behold the head of a traitor. So die all traitors. God save the king."
God save the king.
That's much better. The head would then be impaled onto a soldier's pike. It would be carried through the streets of London, down towards London Bridge, which in those days, that was the only crossing over the River Thames. The head would then be displayed above the entrance to the city as a sign of fate awaited all would-be traitors. Meanwhile, the headless corpse, that would be taken down, thrown into a handcart, brought back into the tower, where it would be quickly buried in an unmarked grave in the Chapel Royal of St. Peter at Vincula. Right, just like the headless corpse, let's now return our attention back to the tower. So where are we now? We're now in the outer ward of the Tower of London, between the inner and outer ballium or defensive walls. This inner wall here, that's 50 foot high. The outer wall behind you, 28 foot thick. This road that runs for the middle of these two walls, this is called Mint Street. It's because it was here until the year 1810, all Cornish of the realm was designed and produced. The builders which housed the mint were known as the casemates, or houses within the wall, and it's now served as accommodation for some of my Yeoman Warder colleagues and their families behind that small chained area there. Entrance into the mint exhibition is for that open black door there behind you. The 6 white frame windows you see above the entrance to the Royal Mint, now that was the private residence of Sir Isaac Newton when he was based here at the Tower of London in charge of the Royal Mint. I'll let you all into a little secret right now. See that second window on the left-hand side up there? See that there? Now that is the exact room that he invented gravity in, right there. Well, you must have heard of it, that great British invention, gravity, yeah? Before he did that, it was all just floating around, minding our own business. Apples, apparently it was a nightmare, I don't know. So behind you and to your right over there is a taller, narrower archway. That is the byward postern or sally port. That is the royal VIP entrance into the Tower of London. Beyond those gates through there was a drawbridge leading to the Queen's Stairs, which goes directly down onto the River Thames. Rather than travel through the now practice of London, royalty and nobility, they would rather travel down the River Thames in impressive barges, tie up alongside the Queen's Steps, and with little difficulty have direct access into the Tower. Now those gates through there, they are the original gates, and they date back over 700 years. And it was by those exact gates through there that King Henry VIII so lovingly greeted his second wife, Queen Anne Boleyn, the mother of Queen Elizabeth I. Now, poor Anne, she was fated to return to come back to the Tower some 3 years later for a very different reason and for a very different set of gates. Before you here stands the Bell Tower, so named for the small white bell for the top up there, which contains... well done. You'd be surprised the amount of people haven't got a clue what we're keeping a belfry around here. Now, that contains the oldest surviving curfew and alarm bell in the City of London. When that bell up there was rung on an alarm, that would be the signal for all the gates to be closed, the portcullises to be dropped, and then the battlements would be manned in defence. And it's still rung out to this day, twice a day, once in the afternoon, to let all strangers know the Tower of London is closing, then again at 9 o'clock at night, to let everybody know we're preparing for the showing of the keys, which is a 700-year-old royal ceremony which takes place there every single night at 10 p.m, and that's the traditional locking up of the Tower of London. Now, interestingly enough, that bell up there was made here in London, in East London, down Bell Lane, the same place as the Liberty Bell was made, no less. There you go. Do any of my American friends know that? No? Do any of my American friends know the difference between that bell and the Liberty Bell? No? Ours still works. Told you not the duff one. Get rid of that one. Don't need that one no more. So the bell tower here, this is the strongest of the 13 towers in the wall. This stands on a base of solid masonry some 30 feet deep, 20 feet below the ground and 10 feet above. Inside these walls here are two circular prison chambers. Sir Thomas More, the one-time Lord Chancellor of England, the man for all seasons. Now he was held in the lower chamber for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as the head of the Church of England. At the same time, for the same reason, John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, he was held in the upper room up there. Now that was known as the strong room. Both of these men, they were to suffer terribly, but neither could be persuaded to abandon their beliefs. Then in 1535, both of these men were taken out, up onto Tower Hill, where they were both publicly beheaded by means of block and axe. 400 years later, in 1935, both of these men were canonised saints in the Roman Catholic faith. Another famous person to be held up there in the strong room was a young Princess Elizabeth Tudor. A half-sister, Queen Mary Tudor, lovingly known as Bloody Mary, she had reason to believe that young Elizabeth was implicated in the Sir Thomas Wyatt Rebellion of 1554, which opposed Mary's plan of marrying Philip of Spain. Fortunately, young Elizabeth she found innocent, and she was banished to Woodstock for a time. She was to return back to the Tower some 4 years later through the same gates as her mother in preparation for her coronation as Queen Elizabeth I. This was to be the last time she'd visit the Tower of London in a long reign of nearly 45 years. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Now he was the eldest of 13 illegitimate children to King Charles II. After the death of his father in 1685, this handsome and very popular young man, he was persuaded to stake his claim to the throne by virtue of his uncle James being a Roman Catholic. Now, to push home his claim, he landed in the West Country of England, and he marched inland gathering popular Protestant support in what became known as the Monmouth Rebellion. Now, this revolt was easily crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of July, 1685. The young Duke, he escaped the battlefield and he evaded capture for a week until found hiding in a ditch. Condemned to death in his absence, there was no need for a trial. And 3 days later, he was taken from this tower here out up onto Tower Hill. Now, this was to become one of the bloodiest executions ever to take place in English history. The execution that day, now he was a man named Jack Ketch. Now, Jack Ketch was a part-time butcher, part-time executioner, but a full-time alcoholic. He turned up on that fatal day as drunk as a lord, bringing with him the wrong axe. It took 8 strikes of that axe to try and sever the head from the body. Even then, he had to get out his butcher's carving knife to cut through the bone and the muscle and the gristle. Once the head was removed, both body and head were placed into the handcart, both brought back in here to the tower, where the head was quickly sewn back on so an artist could produce a portrait before being buried in the beautiful Chapel of St Peter at Vincula some 24 hours later. Some of your faces now is the picture, I can tell you. Right, coming in. Let's be heading around the corner. Chop, chop.